Okay. Okay, great. So we're going to get started here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hive Data Think Tank webinar series. Thank you for joining us from all around the world. And again, if you want to drop your location in the chat box, that would be great. We'd love to see where you're joining us from. Today, we're going to be discussing CIO Insights, the future of post-pandemic work. My name is Maddie Watt. I am the Senior Manager of People and Programs at the Hive. Right now, I'm going to just briefly talk about the ground rules for this webinar before I explain what the Hive Think Tank does, and then I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to TM Ravi, the Hive's founder and managing director. So for the chat rules, please be respectful in the chat and please refrain from product plugs. This is not the place to do that. We love questions, so please use the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of your screen to ask presenters questions. You can also upvote the questions that you want to see answered. So if you see one that's already there, just upvote it and it will go to the top of the question list, and that way our panelists can answer those ones in order. This session is being recorded and it will be available to view later on the Hive's YouTube channel, and I will go ahead and drop that link in the chat. To follow along or contribute on social media, please use the hashtag HiveData. So I'm briefly going to just talk about the Hive Think Tank for a minute and tell you about our upcoming events. The Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. Right now, we're bringing you virtual events every week. We've got 4 planned for this month, and we are planning June's schedule. So you have to make sure to check back with our meetup page to find out about all of the great events that we're bringing you. We also have an online content blog, which is hosted on Medium, and that's where you can read about more of our thought leadership pieces and how we feel about the investment spaces, including AI, blockchain, enterprise, industrials, fintech, insurtech, health, 5G, and entrepreneurship in general. Next slide, Ravi. Thank you. We'd like to thank our think tank sponsors, including TIBCO, and we have Sharon Mandell, the CIO of TIBCO, representing TIBCO. Woo woo. And we'd like to thank the rest of our sponsors listed here. If you would like to become a sponsor of the Hive Think Tank or find out about working with us on a webinar, please contact me. My email is right there below, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. And I'm just going to go over very quickly the couple of events we have. We have next week, next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, we have how providers and payers support patients and members during COVID-19. We're going to have Dr. Michael Kalojetsky, I'm sorry, I'm kind of botching that name, and Dan Lauder talking about this in a fireside chat. Dan is this co-founder and CCO, Chief Commercial Officer of one of the Hive startups, Glide Health. Next slide, Ravi. Great, and then we have on the 21st, which is a Thursday, again at 11 a.m. PT, Remote Design-Driven Innovation. This is gonna be a really cool webinar. We're gonna do it with the design consulting firm Conrad and King, and we are going to be talking about how in the era of remote work, how design driven innovation is occurring, and they're going to go over really cool practical tips and tools on how to make that happen. So definitely join for that one. And then our final webinar for May, next slide, thank you, is going to be Transportation Transformation. This is a book that's coming out with Evangelos, and he's on the left of the screen, and it's going to be moderated by Stephen. They both are innovative and thought leaders in all things transportation, and we've actually done a couple of events with them, so it's going to be a really interesting conversation all about how the transportation area is changing with AI, so please join in for that one, and that's on Wednesday, May 27th at 11 a.m. Pacific. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the virtual remote to TM Ravi. Thank you all for joining us today, and please remember to use the hashtag HiveData and ask questions using the Q&A function below.
And Maddie, I noticed that you didn't go down trying to pronounce the last names of Evangelos.
I thought I would just botch one name for today's presentation.
Thank you all for joining today. I'm very, very pleased that we can do these online events. Thank you, Matty, for making it happen. Thank you, Erin at TIBCO and the whole TIBCO team, including Sharon, for supporting us. A few words about the Hive. The Hive is a venture studio. It's a particular kind of venture capital entity where we not only provide long-term capital for a company, but we also collaborate very actively with founders to help them start companies. And so our focus is on leveraging data and data-related techniques to drive disruption and create new opportunities, focused primarily in the enterprise space. And you'll see a number of companies across different domains that we have helped co-create. And if you are an entrepreneur who's interested in engaging with us, please reach out to Matty or myself, and we'd love to work with you. As Matty had mentioned, the hashtag for today's event is Hive Data, and what an exciting topic, the future of work, but now the future of work with a new perspective. So I'm keen to hear about kind of what does it entail? Is it all of us being remote? What's going to happen between sort of, kind of offshoring versus reshoring, automation? Are we going to have camera and temperature sensors at work? So with that, I'd like to introduce Casey Renner, who's the VP of OpenView Partners and who's today based in Cape Cod.
Yes.
Casey?
Yes, thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me. So yeah, it's nice to be here. So as Team Robbie said, I'm Casey. I'm a VP at OpenView. We are a VC that invests exclusively in B2B SaaS companies at the expansion stage, and I manage our expert advisor networks and corporate partnerships. And I'm joined today by Sharon, who Maddie had mentioned, who's the CIO at TIBCO, which is the global leader in integration and analytics software, and Milind Wagle, who's the CIO at Equinix, which is the largest co-location and interconnection platform that enables networks, cloud, content providers, et cetera, to connect with each other. And since this is CIO perspectives, fortunately, you're going to hear more from me, or excuse me, more from these guys than you are from me. I'm just here to guide the discussion along. So Milind and Sharon, it's great to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Likewise. Thank you for having us. Good morning. And we'd love to hear you as well, Casey.
Yeah. I'm just a wannabe CIO. That's why I hang out with you guys. So, to kind of set it up for all of you who are watching, when we had first got together to talk about this, Milind, you had made the point of saying that this pandemic is almost in three phases. There's that work from her workforce transition that hopefully we are at kind of the latter end of now. There's the return to office piece, which is where we're hopefully all going to be soon. And then kind of phase three, which is what the new normal is going to be like. And for all of you watching, we thought it would be kind of interesting to sort of break the webinar down into those three phases, which with a lot of time spent on sort of that return to office piece, which is getting to be top of mind for a lot of folks. But to kick off and kind of just recap phase one, which, a lot of people are sick of hearing about and talking about, but just to set the stage, maybe Sharon and Milind, you could just share a quick update with the audience on what your transition looked like and how, it shifted your priorities as a CIO, and, how quickly we were able to transition and where you guys are now in that.
I'm happy to go first if you're okay with that, Milind. So TIBCO sort of had three phases to its transition, right? So we started to, we were aware that this was coming and was going to hit us eventually. So as we saw things progressing into geographies where we had employees, we started as an executive team discussing things and made some choices to send certain key operational people home to work from home ahead of the pandemic, to be sure that, the key critical people supporting our customers and supporting our infrastructure were one, less likely to get sick from being, out and about and be able to be there to support us. Seattle was our first office that we requested people work from home, and pretty quickly other geographies in the United States followed on. And within a week, we went to 90% work from home. In terms of shifting priorities, I'd say all it did was add to my priorities. So we worked very hard to keep what was our 2020 roadmap going, and we've been reasonably successful at that. Not 100% perfect, but really, really close. The piece that added a challenge is TIBCO already had a percentage of its workforce working from home. So we had a lot of the collaboration tools and the things in place to enable that. Zoom, Slack, G Suite is kind of the core foundation. But parts of the world, their home environments don't have the same level of connectivity we do in the US. Certain companies, we acquired a company that had a Vietnamese division, and they were running very lean. That was a very work in the office culture. So they had desktops, not laptops. So that changed the strategy for us a little bit. So it became about expanding capacity in VPN, VDI, bandwidth, getting bandwidth for people in the home, and security, of course, making sure we kind of went and rechecked everything and doubled down on initiatives there that maybe we were going, on a little bit slower roadmap. Any number of them we pulled in and just made happen a whole lot faster. So.
Yeah, so our story is very similar. I mean, Casey, to your point, I think phase one for us was all around response and stabilization. Also, we call it like the shock and awe phase. Like most people, I think we were trying to just initially assess, is this temporary? Is this long-term? How do we respond? And everyone knows it got big real fast, right? And so our focus immediately was around business continuity. And although we've been doing these BCP exercises for a few years, we had never contemplated a global pandemic in any of our business continuity scenarios. I mean, we had done earthquakes, terrorist attacks, active shooter drills, but never a global pandemic. And so for us, the initial sort of priority was just around, firstly, transitioning this global workforce, and we have more than 10,000 people in 26 countries that we had to transition into a work from home model, except the folks who were obviously running our data centers and keeping the digital economy going. They were, in some respects, the essential workers of the digital economy. And so our goal was to firstly make sure everyone's safety and well-being was accounted for, and then shortly thereafter help people move into the work from home model. Now, like Sharon mentioned, I think the transition for us was more or less a non-event, and the reason for that is over the past few years, Equinix and, like, I'm sure TIBCO and several companies like ours had invested in either cloud technologies, collaboration tools. We had a policy where we said no desktops going forward, everyone gets a laptop. All these decisions that we had historically made from an IT standpoint worked out to be really beneficial. A couple others, by the way, are just zero trust network and security architectures, MFA enablement of our applications. So our initial focus was more around stabilize people. The tools were not as much of an issue, but we just wanted to make sure that we had enough capacity to enable 10,000 people working from home. And then to your second question around prioritization, I think our priorities were business continuity, like we said. The second thing was there was initially some concern that, hey, when so many people work from home, there's going to be a dip in productivity. So we put some instrumentation in our environment to measure productivity, how many people are collaborating on Teams, messages, code check-ins, stuff like that. And in fact, we saw that there was no dip in productivity and people were more engaged than even their pre-COVID, in the pre-COVID scenario. And then the final thing was we just took a look at our all our 2020 commitments, not from the standpoint of cutting down because of cost pressures, et cetera, but more from do we have the capacity to execute and the exact same priorities that we had before this pandemic began? Because we just made an assumption that with people working from home, that there's going to be a 25% reduction in their capacity to just be, productive at work. And so we had to factor that to then just, decide which ones do we want to extend, which ones we want to maybe keep on pause, et cetera.
Casey, can I just kind of come back to one other thing?
Nope, not allowed. All done. No, I'm kidding. Of course, yes.
The thing too is, like as Milind said, there was this shock and awe piece that went to stabilization. I think now we're trying to understand a little bit more about sustainability, and we shifted from this making sure it was possible to, and these are my colleagues in HR and the training and development team, and more about is it workable for people? So there's a whole lot of focus on the culture as well. How do you keep that connection? We have physical fitness challenges going on that are company focused, which is interesting because it brings the company together in a more global way because we're doing them over Zoom. Sometimes time zones make that hard, but I can see that these sessions are scheduled to try to capture kind of these unique times. Meditation sessions, yoga, a lot of training on how to deepen your skills. So I'm actually, I know how to do reactions in Zoom and use the whiteboard in Zoom, which I had never needed to use before. But because we've been running these sessions and trying to help people get more value from them and feel more connected, that emphasis on culture has really kicked up as the technology piece has stabilized a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that will lead kind of into phase two. I know there's a lot of talk about when you return from work, what does the culture look like? We've had a couple of questions from the attendees and would love to sort of tie into this. First one, Milind, kind of directed at you, but how did you come up with that 25% less productivity working from home? Is there a model you use to estimate that, or purely kind of a guesstimate?
Completely subjective, and I think it's going to be different for different people. But one thing that we were very conscious about was that people will have different home and work priorities. Like the concept of, work-life balance is never more important than in this scenario. And so we just had to factor in, we were overtly communicative as an executive team to our workforce, indicating that, perfection was not the expectation in these times, and it was completely okay to, adjust and be flexible as needed. And we directed our managers to do that as well. But the capacity thing was just a subjective calculation.
Got it. And Sharon, on kind of your training point and learning how to use Zoom, I know we've all got our virtual backgrounds on too. So you clearly, I know you were an early adopter of those virtual backgrounds. And Milind, it looks like you're at TIBCO, Sharon, you're in a data center, I'm in our office. So at least we figured that part out too.
Because nobody wants to see my house.
Yes,
I have the stacks of cookbooks behind me right here.
So and kind of the last question on this note before we move to phase two is, have you folks implemented, you're talking about monitoring kind of the work from home productivity and all of that. Have there been specific tools that you've brought in to do that maybe weren't already in place, or are you using existing tools differently with your staff now?
So at TIBCO, we do a lot of visual analytics tools. We sell them and we use them in-house. So what we've done is used a combination of them, and actually my team engaged our solution consultants to help us put together some analytics dashboards where, and we're trying to be very careful with this, right? Because you have to be careful that what you're doing it for the right reasons. So for us, it's more to identify whether we see things going on in certain regions or certain groups where we feel we need to reach out, either with more training or more tooling or more capacity somewhere, and not a, hey, let's measure productivity and see who's at home working and who's not working. That's not really been the focus. But we've created dashboards that aggregate kind of over periods of time some of the same things Milind talked about earlier. And you know, we don't watch it 24/7. We use it to take spot checks and see what trends are really going on, and you know, did they change dramatically? And it's really interesting. The use of Slack and Zoom have just, you know, of course, skyrocketed for us. Email actually tends to be down a little bit because people are using the collaboration tools in a deeper way. We just rolled out Slack not even quite a year ago, so across the whole company. Engineering is a pretty strong user. Yeah. And so you're wanting to see, are they sustaining or are they dropping off? And if it's dropping off, what does that tell you? Is it about the tool? Is it about the groups? But I definitely want to be clear that we're not trying to babysit. And actually in Zoom, there are features in Zoom we turned off so that people wouldn't feel like they were being watched. So I think there's this feature where you can monitor attention in a session. And with the exception of some marketing events, no, we don't even collect the data. So we want to be really clear with the employees what we're looking at and transparent, and why we're doing it and why we're not.
Got it.
Yeah, I'll just expand on that, Casey, and say, I mean, one thing that has been very clear for us is the data and analytics investments that IT have historically made have become more important than ever before. And what I find is people who have access to just better data are making better response decisions in this scenario, right? And that was the case with us too. We had started our analytics modernization efforts a couple of years ago, and the investments in those are proving to be super valuable in this scenario. And especially, as you can imagine, as a business, we're trying to figure out everything from what does this mean to our top line, and you know, how are the bookings looking, to in our data centers, what are the customer traffic patterns, and how do we, how should our policy be shaped by geography, etc. And for all those strategic decisions that we had to make in this response phase, there was heavy reliance on our data and analytics platforms than ever before. And so there was a recognition that hey, all these historical investments that we did, thinking that they would benefit us for operational stuff at that time, they just proved to be super valuable in this time of crisis.
Great, thank you. Right, now let's move to kind of the meat of the phases, so to speak, which is sort of that post-pandemic return to office, you know, kind of what that looks like, sort of. And Milind, I know you mentioned this before. You believe that the, you know, returning back to the office is going to be tougher than, you know, the transition we made to home. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of, you know, what your discussion is starting to look like in terms of, you know, operations and where you see yourselves and working with clients as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the work from home phase was in some respects easy because we just had to enable work from home technology tools and capabilities and make sure that they perform at scale. The return to office is a little more complicated. Firstly, because we are still in the middle of the crisis. I mean, the pandemic. There are a lot of unknowns. So how we're gonna, how this will actually shape out at the other end is not known to all of us. Different parts of the world are in different states of coming out of this crisis. The other thing I find is even the individuals, whether they're employees or people that you interact with, and depending on which location they come from, they are at a different level of either accepting or denying the implications of this pandemic as well. And that includes some of our employees and customers. So how you shape policy that applies to everyone is a little bit of a challenge. Then the other thing I think we have to factor in any sort of like return to office scenario is how do we factor in not just an employee's physical safety, but the emotional safety. And especially when you look at testing is still not very prevalent. There is no vaccine available for the virus. How do we sort of, make sure that the employee does not even is not at risk of catching the virus, as well as like we don't force them to sort of come in an environment where maybe they don't feel they are safe. So what we have bias to is we firstly said we don't want to be leading edge and coming up with the response plans. We will see how other companies are reacting. The second thing is we said we will index our return to office policies to local government regulations wherever we operate in these 26 countries. And so there's not going to be one consistent policy for all our employees going forward. And so we are biasing our return to office approach more as an exception for now. And we'll see. And so unless you are essential to come to the office, we are like really qualifying those needs. And we're like suggesting to our employees to work from home, and we're working fine and more or less in this remote environment. So we're basically making that an exception. And there are 4 scenarios where we are considering those exceptions. And first and foremost, like if there's a customer engagement sort of need. And like I said earlier, there are certain of our customers who are requesting interactions with our employees because we do data center tours, and they would like to continue with those. So that requires employees from our side to be available. So do we make exceptions for those kinds of scenarios? The other thing is, even though remote working and digital collaboration tools are pretty effective, they are not as effective as getting people together in a room to just brainstorm and ideate, right? So we're looking at areas where we might have a significant productivity impact on a certain area where we might have the need for people to just come together, where digital whiteboarding as an example might not be adequate, and see if we need to make exceptions. The third thing for us is around our culture. We are very proud of our culture, and it's one of the competitive differentiators for us. And so how do we recreate the magic that we feel when we are in an office environment virtually? And is that going to sort of like, put some pressure on our culture? And so do we need to, get people together? That's sort of like the third thing. And then the fourth consideration is all around people who have suboptimal home office situations, either, workplace scenarios or personal scenarios. And so we have our employees who are returning to the office. And so we have to figure out what's our policy around that. So like I said, like the unknowns and different situations, not every geography, every person is the same. We have to figure out what makes sense for the the general well-being of everyone.
Sharon, what about you folks over at TIBCO?
So we're also reasonably early in this journey. I think we feel blessed that there isn't huge requirements on our people to come back to the office. And as like Milind said, we're not necessarily going to lead the charge. I know other companies already are in the Bay Area, and it's very interesting to talk to some folks there about how they feel. And I think this emotional safety issue is huge. You know, and I think we'd like to not create those problems if we can avoid it. So we have a task force inside the company now, very cross-functional, to talk about how we would do this. We collected data, being a data-driven company. So it was very interesting to me to see how that data played out inside our company. We're about 4,000 people in, I think, 43 locations, some of which I'm not sure we're ever going back to because they're small, and we're really questioning if they're necessary. But that data kind of had two tails of, God, I want to go back tomorrow. And we think that that's probably largely two things. You know, I kind of say I'm a little bit cranky some days, mostly because I live alone and I'm used to engaging very face-to-face with people, and I miss that, right? So I think there's a population of people who are just that way and like being out and about, but there's also to the suboptimal work conditions. So I think, you know, I see even in some of my employees, the challenges of having kids home from school, and, you know, they're of a certain age where it's very hard for parents to say no, and they're making it work, but I don't think it's easy. So, and those numbers are somewhere between 10 and 12% on either tail. And then, you know, those who I never want to come back to work again.
Yeah.
And then there is this kind of massive middle that say, if you that kind of say, if you tell me we're not coming back to work, I'll be just fine with that. But they're fine if we do. And then there's the people who kind of want to go to this mixed mode. And so for us, from a facility standpoint, just in what space we had and we don't have, does that footprint make sense anymore? Then to the degree that in certain geographies we have concentrations, it's how do you make that work? How do you ensure people really understand the desires and, let's say, the rules around whether you can or can't come into an office today based on your health and your condition, because it's about how you're going to impact others, right? How do you, if you are going to go into some kind of mode about distributing how many people can come into an office on a given day because you can't create the appropriate social distancing with that existing population all showing up to the location on the same day, how do you manage and monitor who comes which days? You know, making sure, you know, do you close entrances to your building so that you have visibility? So we're asking all of these questions, and you know, there are things you might, you know, there's certain cultures who have views around privacy and information you can collect and ask of people, and laws that are different in different geographies. So getting to this sort of one size fits all return in a global company, I think even in the United States, it's challenging because each state is taking a different approach. But globally, we have a lot of questions to ask and answer. And that's why I say this team, you know, we're part of it because we're trying to help figure out how do you manage like the equipment issues and cleanliness around that. But it's so much more a legal HR facilities question, and having those conversations is, you know, different people coming there have different perspectives too. So so we're, like I said, I think we're blessed that we feel we have the time to do that, and we're not in any rush. we've certainly been making exceptions during the pandemic. You know, if I can get people, you know, we do have data centers inside some of our facilities, so people are going in occasionally. We have to get you know, new equipment to folks. So I saw a question out there about hiring. Our hiring hasn't stopped. You know, there are places where each individual department is looking at their budgets, and I've made some decisions to delay it because I'm not convinced for certain roles I can make somebody as productive without that, you know, without us being around them to bring them in. In other roles, it's absolutely critical and things are moving along. So, so we're struggling, but we're continuing to move, and the company's continuing to operate. And as I said, deliver product functionality roadmaps, IT roadmaps. It's all going forward. So we're doing what we need to do to keep that forward in our business. And we're fortunate to have a situation where I think both, you know, Milind and I are in businesses that the world still needs, even though that's going on. So I think we feel very blessed by that.
A question I have for both of you, you know, and I'm not sure if you know the answer, but you know, Sharon, you were saying, you know, your sort of task force is asking a lot of questions, and Milind, same with your task force. How are you getting or going to determine the answers to that question and figuring out, you know, okay, yes, this is the plan we've come up with and we're going to execute on it? Kind of how are asking all these questions getting you to that, or is right now it's still kind of very up in the air in terms of figuring out those answers in that plan?
So I think, like I said, right, there are a lot of unknowns, but and even we have set up a crisis management team that has cross-functional representation in there from everyone from our business continuity, operations, finance, legal, HR, IT. And we used to meet on a daily basis initially. That's now become a weekly thing for us right now. And we do a lot of what if scenarios. And so we say, what if this means and what is our entry criteria for opening an office? What would be our criteria for closing down that office again if something had to go south? So those are the kinds of scenarios that we are doing very actively, just like we would do in a business continuity scenario. But what I'm also finding is the community of people exchanging information on these topics, whether they are CIOs talking to each other or HR professionals talking to each other or legal professionals, is I think that those communication channels are full right now. I mean, it's like the amount of camaraderie that is just emerging across companies is just amazing to watch. So we are relying on those sort of data points, both internal what if scenario planning as well as some external inputs.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these questions have just, like I said, we've put them together over maybe the last week or 10 days, and various teams are going off and they're tasked with answering very specific things. And then we're going to come back and bring that together. I do see a question out here about looking at analytics to help decide what's appropriate and when. And obviously, you know, we are in the same way we did as things started to go out. We are looking at the government issued regulations to be one factor in the decision. But TIBCO has built a COVID analytics hub. I'll type the URL into the chat if people are interested in it. But we're also using some of that data ourselves to, like, even if a government says, well, we're opening up, but we see from the data that our office is in a particular hotspot, we're probably going to make a different decision there. Because again, we're more concerned with, you know, making sure our people are safe and the emotional safety question in an area that's, you know, still kind of racing towards its peak. And we think we're going to see this go up and down as things open up. I have a friend in Hong Kong, and that's already happened, right? Where while they've done a very, very good job, as they opened up certain parts of the city, something would happen and they'd kind of tamp things back down again and bring it back up. So I think we're going to be using that data all of the time as part of our decisions. I think if you talk to me, if we come back in 3 or 4 weeks and have this discussion, I think we'll have some different answers. We've also noticed other companies, I think it was Amazon or someone said, hey, we're just not coming back till September, right?
Yeah,
so I think we're going to see a variety of approaches depending on what companies can and can't do. I do think that, and I see it happening out there already, you're going to start to see applications come up that do, for people who are willing to do it and where it's legal and safe to do so. There's going to be some combination of questions being asked of the individual combined with these other data sources that might help companies decide who should be where in conjunction with their own policies and decisions. I think you'll start to see that happen pretty soon. Ravi asked about temperature sensors. I haven't heard us talk about that yet in our buildings, although I have to tell you, I was a crazy person who took a cruise in Asia in February, and in Singapore, I saw that in the entrance and exits in and out of the subway stations, in and out of certain shopping centers, and in and out of certain large hotels and conference centers. So it is being done in certain parts of the world, but we haven't talked about that yet anyway, inside TIBCO.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of, on that note, kind of the employee experience piece. I know that's something that's top of mind for people too, and sort of how you're ensuring the safety, but also the privacy. What can and can't you ask them to do on the temperature piece? Or, there's been talk about wearing the tracking devices that's sort of monitoring, who you're coming into contact with, but then there's security implications on that. And what are you doing with that data? What does the employee experience look like with all of this, in your opinions?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know what the new normal is going to be. Yeah. And those are the exact same questions we're asking, right? I mean, if we do health screening for everyone who enters our facilities, firstly, do we even have qualified people to do that? And what do we do with that information? What are the implications to employee agreements that we have that they've signed when they entered the workforce? What sort of applications and technology should we invest in to prevent workplace contamination? And what does our support process look like? I mean, we've even talked about from a sanitization standpoint. We have an open seating concept in most of our offices, so there's no assigned desk. So how do you do seat assignment? Do you alternate desks get assigned, and then what's our sanitization policy when someone occupies the desk and goes somewhere else? Similarly, conference room and occupancy implications. What should be our policy? Do we restrict the number of people in conference rooms? Questions like, because people typically trigger their Zoom meetings from the consoles on the conference room tables, how do they get sanitized once someone starts a Zoom meeting? Do we need to explore voice activation, activation technology for meeting management? So those are the kinds of employee experience questions that are definitely going to surface. Like Sharon mentioned, what we are doing is we're trying to take a pulse of our employees right now. So in the next few weeks, we're going to issue a company-wide survey to just get some inputs from what they feel about this, and our policies are going to reflect that, take that input and then figure it out.
It's really interesting because this data very much reflects exactly what we saw in our employee population. So
everyone seems to be on the same page.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, Milind, that's why all the things you just said are why I think facilities, and someone has a question, and I really hadn't thought about this quite this crisply, but we were talking about it yesterday. Is facilities and technology that supports that may be a new priority that we haven't really all come to grips with. To your point of seating assignment, do you really have a digital reflection of your physical space? Do you need monitoring things? One of the big questions about people coming back to work has been, how do employers protect themselves against, if somebody gets sick, not being, if they've been being diligent, not being at risk of lawsuits because it happened at the workplace. And so are there things we're going to have to put in place to ensure that we live up to the stated policies to our employee base? I think this culture thing is a big deal too, right? Different industries have different competitiveness for their labor and their workforce. And I do think really understanding the sentiment of the employee base as you come back, if you are in a competitive environment, I think you ignore that at your peril, perhaps. And I think, some of those tools about really understanding and giving people in a safe way, feeling like they can speak their mind without being at risk, it is going to become increasingly important. Because I think, I don't know, it's my belief that, unless the miracle vaccine arrives in 6 months, we're in some version of this for a long time. This is not a 1 quarter, 2 quarter event. I don't know, Milind, if you see it the same way. But.
Same. I mean, very similar philosophy. I think there's, even in the post-vaccine environment, I think there are parts of this which are going to be permanent, and we just have to figure out, to what extent some of this is going to be permanent. In fact, just yesterday, we were in a meeting where one of our offices is getting redesigned, and one of the questions posed was, do we move from open seating to the old cube-based configurations again? And then the questions immediately followed was, how much of this do we think is temporary versus permanent? And we don't know the answers to all of that, but I have to guess that, one, there is going to be some permanent implication to facility strategies. And the fact that most people in our industries have been able to work from home fairly productively will say that work from home is going to be more acceptable than ever before. We'll have different flavors of it. Facilities strategies, I think people will not be as aggressive about setting up sites than compared to before. I think there's going to be a whole new focus on just like the digital workplace, collaboration, teams, team collaboration, communication type experience than ever before. I also feel there's probably going to be some investments in companies around just creating social communities. I mean, one of the things that we benefited from was we had a enterprise social network that people were lightly engaging in prior to COVID, but post COVID, I mean, I think the global engagement on those platforms is just like significant as people try to seek connections with other employees and other people. It's just like amazing to watch that.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like it's summary, sort of the only known is really the unknown right now, but just all about having that kind of cross-functional task force and running those what-if scenarios is kind of the best place to start and going from there. So I know we only have a few minutes left, and there are a few questions. So, one of them being, and kind of ties into that new normal, which you both alluded to, we don't really know what that looks like. And even a post-vaccine world, what we're doing. Do you think you can enforce employees to get vaccinated for this? That's one of the questions that was asked. Or if they've been vaccinated?
I'm not. I leave that
At
to
liberty.
our legal team to,
Okay.
to solve. I know personally what I'm going to do because for myself, but and what companies, again, culturally, you're just going to see things be different, and I think it's a real challenge, because I think companies want to think about fairness across their employee base, regardless of where they live and what they're allowed to do and not do. But we all know, if you're in a global company, things don't look exactly the same in every country, right? So kind of navigating through, what's the cultural decision we want to make alongside what you're allowed to do versus how will that affect my, again, ability to hire. So, but I'm not sure what's going to happen there, because, like I said, that's a legal question. We aren't starting with the vaccination question. We're starting with, what is it we feel we can reasonably ask of employees and expect them to answer in order to create a safe workspace? That's, I think, where we're starting the conversation. More on that volunteering of information, and where are we going to run into problems there that make it hard for us to feel safe bringing employees who want to come back to the office, or who need to because of their job function, or who need to travel, right? Travel, we didn't talk about that at all. Just deciding when are you going to let someone get on a plane for work again is a complicated question. Some of our salespeople or our account executives are itching to go, because they feel that's essential to making contact, and yet, we're not quite ready to let people do that. So, so like I said, I think we're starting not with what are we going to force people to do, but what do we think the right answer is for safety, and can we do that without making people say that's not a company I want to work for.
One of the things I think will be interesting to watch is, I think, the individual rights and data privacy rights of individuals versus the health of the collective is going to be tested, or like it'll have to be rebalanced in some respects. So I think there's state and national government policy implications for this, probably more bills and regulation on this front. And then companies will have to apply those philosophies into their individual workplaces. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out.
Yeah, for sure. And the last question, looks like we'll have time to answer, is for you folks, how are budgets changing as you're moving forward? Obviously, I'm sure you're deploying, you've talked about, will people come in to do the cleaning and perhaps, investing in new technologies, but are you seeing any significant changes in the roadmap currently, or predicting that there will be changes down the line?
Well, so, I tend to be a realist about these things. If revenue goes off of a cliff, there's going to be impact to budget, right?
Yeah.
So far, I feel like, because of the importance of data, because of the importance to continue to serve our customers well, because that's how you protect against, the revenue loss. Because of the need to support all these new types of environments. I mean, we are bringing in some new tools to the workplace to make it better to work from home. Mm-hmm. I don't feel it hitting my budget as much as it may hit other parts of the organization. I think for a change, IT may be a relatively safe place to be, because the companies are somewhat dependent upon us to keep them operating and running, and providing new services in this new reality depend on us and our teams to be able to respond and respond pretty quickly. That doesn't mean, like I said, that I won't feel any pressure anywhere. And I'm trying to make smart decisions and have very grown-up conversations with my executive peers. You know, when the general question comes is how much, you know, could you save money? Sure, I can save money. Which services and what levels of service are you willing to, you know, take a hit on? And then I can tell you exactly where I can find those dollars. Yeah. And if you're not willing to make those business decisions, because budgets are really business decisions, not tech decisions, you know, when we make them as a team, then we'll react to them as managers and leaders in the organization. So far, no one's been willing to take a hit in my org. Now, I don't know that that will last forever, and I don't want to be Pollyanna about it and make everybody feel okay. I mean, if things get lean, IT will take a hit somewhere.
Yeah.
But it'll be very conscious, I think, about where we do and don't do it. We already of a long series of roadmaps, even coming into COVID, it was probably going to get pushed. You know, we made a quicker decision to push that. And I am forcing things that weren't, so the way the funding model works at TIBCO is, you know, there's a certain sort of steady state funding, and then different departments can come bring money to fund their initiatives if they have it. And so there are various things that were talked about as needed. Certain things have certainly slowed down, and we're trying to find less expensive ways of accomplishing something similar. Mm-hmm. In other cases, money's actually showing up because we think it's going to happen. And in other places we're, you know, making calls that maybe we don't need that this year, but it was never certain that we were going to do it anyway. So that's where it is for us.
Yeah, I would say very similar, right? Which is, firstly, this is not just a health crisis. I think this is an economic crisis as well, right? And every company will get affected by the economic aspect of this in one shape or form. Some will emerge stronger, but short term, I think every company will get affected. I think there's definitely going to be some shift in budgets for the companies that are just in survival mode. It's all going to be around, you know, reducing cost, filling the revenue holes that maybe this crisis is creating. For others, it's going to be around just building economic and infrastructure resilience in their environments. So investments in business continuity, because that's maybe part of their core business. And then for the others, there's an opportunity for just reinvention, like figuring out newer ways of maybe engaging customers, helping support this work from home environment. I don't know. Basically, there are probably opportunities to just look at your analog workflows in the environment and figure out where maybe digitizing them can help. And but on this budget question specifically, at least in our case, we are not seeing any short-term impact to our budgets, but I definitely see some readjustment and reallocation of those funds.
Awesome. That brings us right to 3 o'clock. So I'm going to pass the microphone back over to the Hive team.
I really appreciate, Casey, you moderating this panel discussion today, and Sharon and Milind, and for your thoughts and what interesting times we live in. I didn't imagine in my lifetime. I thought about earthquakes and so forth. I didn't think the whole globe would shut down like this.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I haven't been home this long for this continuous a period of time for well over a decade. So this is not, and it's not all bad, but I'm looking forward to being able to the day where I can walk up to a friend and hug them.
Yes, yes. Very much so.
I especially want to thank our audience for being so loyal to us.
Yes.
And
Oh,
so
great
the
questions
whole
too.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Really
very
appreciate
engaged.
it.
So
Thank you all.
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.